Hello everybody and welcome back to Belle's OT Corner. And oh my goodness, it's been a hot minute since I've jumped on to talk to you all, and I'm sorry about that. I got hit with the flu over here in England, and it's a corker this year. It's definitely swinging around everybody. So anyone that is here in England, I hope you are, staying nice and healthy. And we're pushing through. Spring is almost here. It's coming. We can hold out for it. And to some of my listeners back in Australia, I hope the transition into school went really well for you all and that you're starting to settle back into that school routine. So today's episode, we are going to dig into all things interoception. Now, just a little disclaimer before we dig into it. I am by no means an expert in the area, and I will talk about a couple of people that you can go and look for some more information in today's episode. If you're interested to learn some more, and I'll put those in the podcast description as well so that you can go and find that. But what I'm hoping to do today is share what I know. I also want to acknowledge that the evidence and the research within interoception is continuing to evolve, and there's lots of research going on at the moment. And so obviously as that research comes out, what we might do in practice will change. But for now and today, I'm just going to share what I know about how interoception works and what I have found to be helpful in my occupational therapy sessions as well. So now that that's aside, let's jump into it. So you may remember from the first episode that we did, the what is sensory processing. Fundamentally, all of our senses are about receiving information from somewhere in our body and our brain figuring out what to do with that. So for interoception, it's all about that internal sense, our brain collecting information from our body about what's happening in our body to then figure out what we need to do. And this can be quite closely linked, or is directly linked actually, to our body being able to maintain a sense of homeostasis, where it can keep everything in balance. So homeostasis is where any organism, so humans, cells, anything, animals, we all do it. But we look at what we need to be doing to maintain and adjusting our body to be able to survive. So if we think about that, this can be things like, well, to be able to survive, we need to drink water. We need to use the toilet. We need to feed our bodies. We need to be able to recognize our emotions, because our emotions are typically telling us that we need to act and change or do something to keep ourselves safe. So there's lots of bits that come into this and lots of bits of information that our brain is processing. But as we go through, I want you to kind of keep coming back to that idea of it's all about what is my body telling me about what it needs to be able to come back to this state of balance, this state of feeling calm, and this state of feeling safe. Okay, so when we break down how our interoception works, it has kind of a 4-step process, or I like to think of it as having this 4-step process. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to actually notice the sensation in our body. Then we need to recognize what that sensation means. Then we need to figure out what that feeling could be. So putting together all these different sensations, what is my body feeling? And then finally, we create an action plan. So, okay, if that is what I'm feeling, what do I need to do? Now, this can happen in lots of different ways, but as always, we'll work through an example together to sort of understand it a bit deeper. So let's take toileting as an example. How do you know when you need to go to the toilet? And for a lot of us as adults, we might not even recognize or directly notice every time, because for us, or for some of us maybe, our interoceptive system works really well, and all of a sudden we end up in the bathroom and we knew we needed to go, and so we just went. But I encourage you to start to pay attention to when you know you need to go, what is your body actually telling you? What can you actually feel? So when I need to go to the bathroom, for example, I will feel a bit of a tightness around my tummy where I can feel that my bowel is a little bit full. If I really need to go, I might be squeezing my bottom really hard, or I might start to feel a little bit uncomfortable and start to shift in my seat a little bit. These are all different sensations that my internal body is feeling. That message gets sent up to my brain. So that's the noticing the sensation. My brain then has to recognize, okay, well, if we're feeling a little bit of that tightness around the bowel, and look, her bottom cheeks, they're squeezing together a little bit, and then it can go recognize what they mean and create the feeling. And the feeling is then we need to use the toilet. So once that feeling is created, the brain can then go, I know what we need to do when we have that feeling. I know what that feeling means. It means you need to take yourself off to the toilet, because that is the action for that feeling. Now, that's just one example of what our interoceptive system can impact upon. But it actually has heaps of monitoring that is going on all the time. So in this monitoring of our body state, it monitors things like our heart rate. So there's receptors around our heart, and our heart rate gets sent up to our brain. It might measure our lungs and how fast we're breathing. And so after a run, when you're really panting and you're breathing really hard, or when you're scared, you might start breathing really hard. It's monitoring that as well. It monitors our stomach. So it might send signals about when we're hungry, when we're eating and we've eaten a little bit too fast and we feel really full. It might send messages about from our tummy in relation to some of our feelings as well. So if you get that twisty tummy, you might be a little bit anxious, you might be a little bit scared. Lots of different things could be going on. As I mentioned before, we can get messages regarding the toileting, and so from our bladders and our bowels around when we need to use the toilet. We can also, we can also get messages from our skin and from our muscles. And we get messages around pain, and we get messages around temperature with these ones. And so when something is painful and I need to react and respond to that to keep myself safe, and when the temperature changes, and so maybe I need to put a jacket on, or it's getting hot and so I need to take a jacket off, are all parts that come under our interoceptive system. So I know it sounds like a lot, and we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail into every single one today. We're going to talk more generally around how we can help start to build some of the skills to notice some of these things. Also, I should note, I'm not going to dig too deeply into the emotion side of things today, because I do want to do a separate season on emotional regulation. And so we'll talk about interoception again then. We're going to touch on it briefly today. If you are interested in more, I can point you in the right direction to learn a little bit more whilst I get around to doing a emotional regulation season. It's all coming, baby steps, and we'll get there. So now that we have this understanding of our interoception is all of these messages from our internal body about what state we're in. Okay, cool, we understand that. But what can that actually impact upon? So if we link it now back to some of these occupations and what we have to do within our day, what can our interoception actually impact upon? Well, lots. It can impact upon us noticing when we're hungry, or when we're thirsty, when we're full, when we need the toilet, when we're hot, when we're cold, when we might be starting to get a little bit frustrated, when I'm feeling like, you know what, I just need to move. I need to get up and move away from my computer because I've been sitting all day and my focus is gone. All of these different senses around noticing what my body needs can then impact upon our ability to engage in lots of different occupations. So things like toileting, things like dressing so that I'm choosing the right clothes for the day. Things like being able to manage feeding times and actually recognize that I'm hungry so that I have that motivation to move away from the very interesting game that I was playing or the very interesting activity I was watching on the iPad, to then recognize that actually I am hungry and I do want some food. And so the motivation is there, and all of a sudden I'm much more willing to engage in having some food at dinner time. So as you can see, it's kind of a little bit of a snowball effect, and it's not the only thing that can impact upon these areas, but it can definitely contribute to a child's ability to become independent in these areas. Because if you're fundamentally not feeling the sensation that tells you need to use the toilet, eventually your body is just going to go. And so you might find that there's a child in your class or you have a child at home that they're really struggling with toileting, and you notice and they're either like rushing to the toilet at the absolute last second, or they're just not noticing at all and they may still be wearing nappies. One component that could be occurring for that child is they're not actually noticing the feeling, as well as then being able to manage all the individual steps of toileting separately. So it's kind of what are those little building blocks that we want to look into and just check that we're going okay and check that there may not be any difficulties to then be able to achieve that independence in the occupation. But you can start to see how it can have that really big impact upon independence, because if I'm not feeling it and I'm requiring somebody else to tell me what my body needs, well then how am I going to start to build the skills to be able to do things for myself? Now, the really cool thing about interoception is a lot of the research is showing us that we can improve upon it, and we can explicitly show and teach children how to notice these sensations in their own body, and most importantly, how to notice what the sensations are for their own body. Because I guarantee you the sensations that I experience will be different to the sensations that you experience, and will be different to the sensations that your child experiences. So what I feel in my body when I need to use the toilet will be different to what you feel in your body, and be different to what your child feels in their body. There may be some similarities, but not everything will be the same. And so as we look at helping children in this space, it really is about helping them start to notice what their body is doing. But I digress. Let's get back to it at its kind of core. So it is this idea of noticing and responding to what our body needs. That's what our interoceptive system does. And it has lots of different areas that it works in, as we talked about. But fundamentally, it is an idea of being able to notice and respond to what my body needs in those 4 steps. So noticing the sensation, recognizing what it means, creating the feeling, so putting all that information together to create the feeling, and then having my action plan or my response to that feeling to help myself get back to that state of homeostasis or feeling like everything is calm. So then what can it look like when we have difficulties in this area? Great question. Difficulties similar to what we were talking about with our proprioceptive and our vestibular system can be seen if we're hypo-responsive or hyper-responsive. But we can also see difficulties in children if they're getting mixed signals, so their brain's not quite decoding the sensation in a way that's helpful for them to figure out what it means. We can also see difficulties when children have challenges finding the words to describe that feeling. And we can also see difficulties when they might not be able to link the emotion or the sensation or the feeling with what they need. And so I've noticed that my tummy's feeling funny, but I go and try and eat some food, but actually that feeling of funny in my tummy meant that I needed the toilet. And so we start to have difficulties linking what that sensation means for the action that I need to go and do. So there's kind of 5 ways where we can start to see some difficulties here, and we'll talk through all of them briefly before we get into these kind of so what can we do? So hyper-responsive, as you might remember before from both of our previous episodes, is where you notice lots, and it's a small sensation, or what might be perceived to me as a small sensation could be perceived to this child as a really big feeling that needs to be addressed, or a big sensation that needs to be addressed. So practically what this could look like is this might be a child that feels like they always need the toilet. As soon as their tummy starts to tweak just a little bit, they might be, oh, I need the toilet, and they're going to sit and they're trying to use the toilet, but there's no result, or there's the tiniest little result. And then 10 minutes later, they're sitting down and they feel like they need to try again. So their body is responding a little bit too quickly to that sensation. Or it might be a child that there's a tiny change in temperature and they've noticed it. And they're going, it's so hot, when somebody else might feel like it's just a little bit warm, and vice versa if it's cold. We can also see with hyper-responsive kids, they might be processing some sensations as painful. And again, as a parent or a teacher, you might look at this child and go, that shouldn't hurt, you're okay. But that child is in genuine pain and they have felt that as a very painful response. And ultimately, when we see children with hyper-responsiveness, it can really impact upon their ability to focus in occupations, on different occupations. It could be they have difficulties focusing on schoolwork, or they have difficulties focusing until they're dressed, or they have difficulties focusing at dinner, because what's happening in their brain is they're noticing so many different little sensations in their body that their attention is constantly being pulled and shifted from the actual task that they are trying to engage with. And what we do to kind of help some of these children is very similar. So we'll talk through that after we go through kind of some of the difficulties. So then that hypo-responsive child, this is when, as we talked about in our previous episodes, we're not getting enough information for what is going on, and waits for until it's that really, really strong input before their brain might notice it. And so this might be a child that doesn't feel hungry, doesn't ask for a snack, and then tells you, I'm starving, and gets really cranky and needs food right then and there. Or as soon as they say they're hungry, you know that means you have about 5 minutes to get some food into them before they're going to be really, really cranky, instead of just, oh, I'm a little bit hungry, mum. Or, mum, I'm hungry, but you know that they've just had some food and you're probably okay for a little bit. It might be a child that doesn't notice that they need the toilet until they're at that point of it being absolutely busting. Now, I don't know about you, but when I feel like I'm absolutely busting and you're really trying to hold on because you're in the car and you just want to get to where you're going, it can turn into that really painful sensation. And it goes from feeling like pressure to actually starting to be painful. That's the best kind of way I've found to start to describe some of that hypo-responsive, because we don't feel it until it's a really strong sensation that our brain needs to pay attention to. So that's kind of a hyper-responsive and a hypo-responsive. Then we can have where there's mixed signals, which I talked a little bit before, and so we can't quite determine what that sensation means or what part of my body that sensation was coming from, or we might not be noticing when we don't have the words. And so there's so many different ways we can describe these sensations. And as we talk through some worked examples, you'll start to get a bit of a feeling for that. But if I just pick one body part, and we can talk through all the different things that body part can feel. If we talk about our hands, for example. So our hands can feel hot, our hands can feel cold, our hands can feel clammy, they can feel sweaty, they can feel dry, they can feel wet, they can feel itchy, they can feel like they need to move and they need to fidget, they can feel, what else do my hands feel? They can feel like they need a pull, like if you need, like feel like you need to crack your knuckles. They might feel tingly. They might feel like they've got pins and needles. You can start to see there's so many different words that we can use to describe our hands. And all of those words do link to a slightly different sensation and can mean slightly different things. So for example, if I'm a little bit worried or a little bit anxious, my hands feel like they need to move, and so I'll start to fidget with my fingers and move my hands around, and that's one clue for my brain that I might be feeling a little bit anxious. My brain will have to put that together with some other clues, like my breathing might start to get a little bit faster, my tummy might start to feel a little bit twisty, I typically feel like I need to go for a wee, and once it gets all of that information, it can go, hang on, this is what you're feeling. But my brain needs to be able to identify exactly what that sensation is, and to be able to identify what each of those sensations are, we need to have the words to be able to describe it. And this is typically where we start with our children when we work within interoception, is helping them start to notice and describe how their body is feeling. So that's when we can see difficulties, when children don't have the words to then be able to express their interoceptive needs. And then the last one is when we see difficulties when a child can't link their emotion with what that actually means that they need. And this one is one that we can help through practice, and there's lots of other strategies that we can do to help a child build up this ability to go, okay, so my body's told me this, and I can now identify that this is what my body's told me. But what does that mean? What do I then need to do to help my body feel good again, to help my body feel calm again, or to meet the need that my body has identified? So when we put it all together and we've gone, okay, I feel hungry, what does that mean? It means I need to go and get some food. Or if, for example, I've noticed that I'm frustrated and my heart's beating a little bit fast, my brain is getting really fuzzy and it can't think, and I notice my hands are getting a little bit sweaty, my legs are getting a little bit twitchy, like I need to get up and move. I can put all of that together and go, you're a bit frustrated. I know as an adult that what my action plan can be from that can be to take some big breaths, can be to walk away from the situation. It could be to go and have a drink. Lots of different strategies that we have that we know how to implement, and we can then start to model and help the children that we work with understand, when I'm feeling this way, I can do these different activities to help me feel better so that I can come back to the activity. And even if I've gotten frustrated by the activity, I can recognize that I'm frustrated. I can do this action plan to help me feel better so that I can come back to that same activity and ask for help, or back to that same activity and problem solve it now that I have the space to think. And so the really important thing to remember with this is we want to help the child meet what their body needs to be able to engage in the task or the occupation that they're trying to engage in. And the most important thing to remember when we look at this is the higher the challenge that's involved, the more supports that we're going to need. The less of a challenge that's involved, the less supports we're going to need. And when I talk about this, I mean, if we know that there's a kid that's having difficulties noticing some of these interoceptive cues, and we know that in a classroom, for example, we're about to ask them to do a task that is going to be a frustrating task, well, as soon as that child has to have the cognitive load of figuring out that they're frustrated, on top of the cognitive load of dealing with the frustrated task, there's going to be too much and they're not going to be able to engage with it. And so what we do is we increase the supports, we help them recognize that they're feeling a bit frustrated, build that action plan together, help them calm down, so that all of a sudden the only thing they need to engage with is the task itself. Or, for example, if we think about one at home and we're looking at dinner time, for example, if we know that the child hasn't necessarily felt that they're hungry, and so they're kind of pushing food around the plate and they don't really want to do it, well, let's increase the supports. And first, what we're going to do is we're going to help bring some attention to, how is your body feeling? What's going on in your body? Does your tummy feel something? Help them start to identify, my tummy feels a little bit grumbly. Great. Start to link those to what that could mean. I wonder if that means that you need a drink. Could try having a drink. Nah, it didn't quite work. Okay, I wonder what that could mean then, and help them guide to trying some food. And then all of a sudden, I don't need to think about everything my body is telling me. I've recognized what that feeling means. I recognize that I'm hungry. And so now I can happily engage in having some food at meal times. So it's all about looking at that balance between how much is the challenge, and therefore how much support do we need to provide, so that we can then get back to engaging in whatever the occupation was, or whatever the goal is for that child. So that's kind of where we can see some of those difficulties. So we can see, just to recap them, see difficulties in hyper-responsive, hypo-responsive, when we get mixed signals, when children don't have the words, and when they can't link the emotion to what it is that their body actually needs. And ultimately, we want to be able to help the child recognize their body signals and recognize their body state, and what part of their body does that mean. So what do we do? Create that action plan so that they can then engage in whatever the task is that we're trying to help them to engage in. If it's toileting, if it's dressing, if it's having food, if it's being able to persist through a challenging task, whatever it might be. Lots of different possibilities. But it's kind of thinking about how can we help this child notice what they need so that we can continue with blank. Fill in the blank. Alrighty. So what? What does this all mean? Because that is a lot of information to start to wrap your head around. And the so what we'll kind of talk about in terms of things that you can do at home and things that you can do in school. And with helping children with their interoception, I strongly recommend you get guidance from an occupational therapist, and keep in mind that we're looking at this in terms of occupation as well. And so say, we're having difficulties at home engaging in toileting, and see if the occupational therapist might think there could be some interoceptive difficulties for your child. For the specifics, I very much recommend you do seek support from an occupational therapist. But one thing that you definitely can do with your child is help them start to notice what their body is telling them anyway. And this can be helpful for any child. And so it's a really nice one within schools, because it will help all children in your class. Even if you think there are a couple kids that would definitely benefit from this, it will help all of the children in your class. So, what can we do? The first thing I want you to think about is in terms of the multi-step process being, first we need to notice the sensation, then we recognize what it means, then we create a feeling, and then we create our action plan. The best and biggest and most important bit to start with all of this is that noticing the sensation in our bodies. And this is where we can start to encourage children to listen to their bodies. And a lot of mindfulness activities, and I say that hesitantly because a lot of the time you can say mindfulness and people will have quite a big response to it. And I want you to kind of bear with me, because mindfulness activities for the purpose of exploring what our body is telling us are so beneficial when we start to look at interoception. I wonder, what if you sit there and close your eyes right now, wherever you're sitting or standing or whatever you're doing, if you close your eyes and you start to try and pay attention to your body, what can you actually feel? Can you feel, if you really pay attention, can you feel your heartbeat, or does it just feel normal? Can you feel anything in your lungs? Can you feel anything in your fingers or your hands? What about your toes? What about your arms and your legs and the muscles there? What about your brain? Is it busy? Is it quiet? Is it going really fast and your brain is bouncing between 15,000 different to-do lists that you've got to do? What about your tummy? How does that feel? And so you start to bring this awareness to, what is my body actually feeling? And I like to do this through doing little body checks with children, or by doing activities that are going to elicit a really strong sensation in a certain part of our body and being really explicit around how that makes it feel. For example, we might be doing some water play, and we could talk about the fact that our hands feel really wet. Or playing with ice is a great one, because if you hold it for too long, it will get a little bit painful, but it also is very cold, and so it's a very strong sensation for our hands to feel and explore. And for really great ideas and activities, Kelly Barla has some fantastic ones on her website, and she's got also some fantastic trainings as well. And she has also developed an interoceptive curriculum that you can kind of work through with children. And so I definitely do recommend checking out her website for some further ideas and information. But to kind of bring it back to those two ideas of being able to kind of do a body check and do some different activities. So ways you can do a body check are taking times throughout the day to stop and start to go, I wonder how your body's feeling. I wonder how my body's feeling. Let's just notice together. And it might be that you draw out a little person And your child can scribble different colours on it or draw little pictures to help describe, if they don't have those words, help to show you what their body is feeling. And the most important things when we start to engage in a little bit of this, I wonder what might be happening, is we never want to say, that's not what your body feels. Can you imagine if you did that? If someone said that to you as an adult? And if you turned around and you went, you've just, walked up some stairs, but you're feeling a bit unfit, you haven't gone for a walk for a little while, and you go, oh my goodness, I'm so out of breath and my heart's going so fast, and someone turns around and goes, no, you're not, you're fine, that wasn't many stairs. It just wouldn't go so well. You'd be quite offended. You'd probably want to have a bit of a snarky comment back to that person. And it might not be that they didn't get out of breath, but you and your feeling, your lungs are telling you you're feeling out of breath. Your heart's telling you it's worked a bit hard, it's just pumped, and even your legs might be a little bit tingly. Maybe you had some lactic acid build up. Or you've just, gone to the gym yesterday, and so every day when you're moving today, your muscles are like, oh, yep, we worked hard yesterday. And someone turns around and goes, oh, but you're fine. It would not go so well. And so it's really important to think of this and remember this when we work with kids as well. Even if what they're saying their body is feeling sounds a little bit off to you, we want to run with it. Because the more that we help them notice, the easier it's going to be for them to notice what that means. And most importantly, what one child might feel is going to be different to what another child might feel, which is going to be different to what you feel. I remember I worked with a client once, and we were looking at how we feel when we're hot and how we feel when we're cold. And through doing some different body checks and doing some activities where we got really hot, and then, how do we feel when we got hot? What could we feel in our body? Personally, when I get hot, I tend to feel it around my core area first. This child, through a little bit of discovery, we noticed his legs got hot first. Great, fantastic to know. And so his legs for him were the biggest indicator of when he needed to take a jumper off, or if he'd gone outside and his legs got a little bit chilly, that was his indication that he needed to go and put his jumper on or another layer on. And so it is going to be very different for everyone that you work with. Now, back to how we can help. So we can do little body checks, and we can use the power of I wonder to start to help children think about what their body might be feeling. And in these times, it's really important that we talk about what our body might be feeling or what their body could be feeling, and start to use different words to help them start to explore different things and help give them some of that language without telling them what it might be. It's like, I wonder how your body's feeling. I wonder if it's feeling hot. I wonder, are your hands feeling tingly? Are they feeling cold? And we just can start to, if you notice a child is struggling, we can start to give them some options and help supply some of those words to build up that understanding of, oh, that's right, that's what I'm feeling. What we can then start to do is, once we notice the feelings, we can help them start to link with, well, what that might mean. And so one of the really nice ways to do this, and you can do this at home really, really nicely, is if there's a particular area that your child is struggling with, or if you just want to work on it a little bit in general, talking through what your own body feels and the problem solving process that you do, and being really quite explicit with that. Oh, my tummy is really grumbly and I can feel that it's twisty a little bit. I can feel it almost feels like there's someone that's grumbling and reaching my tummy, or I feel like I have a little dinosaur stomping around in my tummy, or I feel like my tummy is almost bubbling and gurgling, sorry. There's lots of different ways you can describe it, and it will be different for you than what it is for me, but we can then go, do you know what? I think I'm a bit hungry. I can feel that my tummy's doing all these things, and that's telling my brain that I'm hungry, and so I'm going to go and get some food. And just starting to be really open and honest, and you can do the same with different emotions, If you get frustrated, that is okay. In fact, that is fantastic. Use that as an opportunity to model to your child. Wow, mummy, or wow, daddy's feeling like this. I can feel that my heart's going really fast, and you can even get their hand and put it over your heart to feel that together. Oh, my heart's going really fast. My voice got really loud. My hands got really tight. I got really frustrated. So do you know what? Mummy's going to go and have some big breaths to help myself calm down. And so again, we can just start to model how we link these things with what we can do to help ourselves calm down. There's lots of different books that we can do about listening to my body and about being able to pay a little bit of attention to what these might need. And so that's kind of that listening side of it, and that linking it to what that means. So linking that sensation to what that means our body is telling us. Now, there is a lot more that we can do with interoception, and it can get quite complex, but I just wanted to start today with some of the basics and some of the little things that you can do. And quickly, I do want to touch on some things within school, because obviously that is a different environment to home, and a lot of what I have talked about today is easier to put in at home. But within a school classroom, you can do some of the same things. If you're doing an activity that maybe you've just come in from PE and you can see all the kids are sweaty, or they've just come in from outside and you actually need to calm them down anyway. But before we calm them down, we might get everybody to freeze, and we're going to listen to our bodies. And I wonder what everyone's body can feel. And someone might say their heart's going really fast. Someone might say their legs are really tired from all the running that they've done. Someone else might say their brain is just so busy. And so you can start to guide and start to ask questions. I wonder how your lungs are feeling. I wonder how your legs are feeling. How are your hands feeling? I wonder how your brains are feeling. And then what we can do is, you could pick and say, well, we're going to do this activity to help us calm down and get ready for learning. And so you can encourage everyone to come and do a mindfulness activity, or maybe it's a bit of heavy work like we've talked about in previous weeks. And then just before we do learning, we're going to do another quick body check. How is your body feeling? How is everybody's body feeling? Start to bring in some of those words and bring in some of those differences, because then you can sit there as a class and go, wow, this is what we were feeling before. Great. We did this. And now this is what we're feeling. So we don't even need to necessarily link the emotion to it. We're just finding little pockets of opportunities to help children notice what their body is feeling and what that might be telling them. Another one could be building in more activities that are going to really target some of those interoceptive things. And so this is anything where you're going to notice a change in your body, or where we would expect someone to notice a change in their body. So you could do something physical. You could do some squats. You could do some big breathing. You could do some jumping jacks to feel our heart rate change after that. Little pockets of time where we can do an activity. So before we do a body check, we do the activity, and then we do a body check afterwards as well. With some of the older kids in class, if they're starting to build some of those skills and starting to recognize some of those emotions, we can help them with the action plan side of things in a classroom. And so it might be a specific student that you're working with, or it could be your whole class where together you plan and problem solve. Well, okay, when we're feeling like this, what could we do? And let's try out different things. If someone says, I think if I'm feeling frustrated, I need to run around. Well, you could try, okay, well, let's practice running on the spot. And what does it do to our bodies? And that'll be different for everyone. And so they could write down, was that helpful? Or did that make my body feel more excited? I know the South Australian Education Department have recently built in an interoceptive curriculum into some of their schools, and they have some fantastic resources as well. So for some of you teachers out there, that could be a really nice place to have a bit of a look for some of other ways that they've implemented it into the classroom, so we don't have to go through 15,000 today. But I think the kind of big takeaways from today's episode is, number one, really want you to remember that a child's sensations and experiences within their body is going to be different to, well, anyone's, I should say, not just a child, anyone's experiences within their body are going to be different to yours. And so when we look at helping in this area, we want to do it from that kind of curiosity perspective. I wonder what could be happening for you, so that they can start to build and understand what their own body is telling them. Number two, we want to kind of think of it and helping them build And so we start with that noticing of sensation, and then we help them start to recognize what that sensation could mean, linking that to a feeling, and then dealing with the action plan and response. If we start with the action plan and response, they won't have noticed it in the first place. And, we're trying to respond to something, but we don't know why and we don't know what that's for. And it's just going to be a much harder battle. And the last big takeaway is start to play around with it. Start to do some body checks. Start to do them with yourself. I have learned so much about my own interoception as I work with more and more children in this area. And as I learn it in uni and I've done studying afterwards, it's something that you can explore together and learn about together and help, your child along the way. But definitely start to play around with noticing how different things make your body feel, doing some body checks, and starting to put some action plans together. If you have any questions, comments about any of this, please feel free to send me a DM or drop me a message. And maybe we'll have a Q&A session or a Q&A episode later where we can address some of those questions. As always, please give us a rate and a review. It makes a huge difference to me. And if you have a friend or a family member or some distant relative that you think might find this podcast helpful, please do share it around so that we can all learn together. Alrighty guys, I hope you all have a fantastic day. Have a great week, and I will speak to you soon. Chat soon. Bye.